The richest man on the Titanic had a seat on a lifeboat. He didn't take it, and he wasn't the only one. By the end of this video, you're gonna know the real stories behind 7 people who never made it off that ship, and why some of them chose to stay. Quick one. Would you give up your seat on a lifeboat, yes or no? Drop it in the comments right now, just yes or no. I want to see what people actually say. This isn't a Hollywood script. This actually happened, and the stories are way more insane than anything a screenwriter could come up with. So let's get into it. Number 1. John Jacob Astor IV. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, Astor and his wife Madeline were in their suite. He went up to the boat deck to check what was going on. At first he wasn't worried, nobody was. The ship was unsinkable, right? But then it became clear something was seriously wrong. Astor helped his 19-year-old wife into lifeboat number 4. She was pregnant. He asked the officer if he could join her because of her condition. The officer said no, not until all the women and children were off the ship. And here's the thing, Astor didn't argue. He didn't throw his money around, he didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He just stepped back, lit a cigarette and waved goodbye to his wife as the boat was lowered. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Now, to understand why this moment matters, the Astor family was American royalty. His great-grandfather founded the fur trade. His father built the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. By 1912, the Astor name meant serious money. Astor's fortune was over $80 million, more than $2 billion in today's money. He was one of the richest men on the planet, and when it mattered most, he didn't use any of it. He just stepped back. His body was recovered a week later. He was identified by the initials on his collar, JJA. 4 months later, on August 14, 1912, Madeline gave birth to their son. She named him John Jacob Astor VI. His father had been dead for 4 months, a boy who never got to meet him. Number 2. Thomas Andrews. Now this guy is a whole different story. If Astor was the money, Andrews was the brains. He was the man who actually designed the Titanic. Thomas Andrews was 39 years old. He was the managing director of the shipyard that built the Titanic, Harland and Wolff in Belfast, Ireland. He came from a family of shipbuilders. His uncle was the head of the company. He'd been designing ships his whole life. And he was on the Titanic for its maiden voyage as part of what they called a guarantee group. Basically a team of engineers from the shipyard who traveled on the first voyage to spot any minor problems and fix them. It was standard practice. But there were no minor problems on this trip. After the ship hit the iceberg, Andrews was in his cabin. He felt the impact. It wasn't a huge jolt, but he knew something was wrong. So he went up to the bridge to talk to Captain Smith. Now, Andrews had designed the ship. He knew every inch of it. And when he inspected the damage, he did the math in his head. He knew exactly how long they had. He told Captain Smith, 2 hours, maybe less. Think about that for a second. You designed this ship, you spent years of your life on it, and now you're standing there telling the captain that your creation is about to sink. But here's what makes Andrews a hero. He didn't try to save himself. He knew there weren't enough lifeboats for everyone. He'd actually argued for more lifeboats during the design phase, but the company said it would clutter the decks and ruin the ship's appearance, so they only put enough for about half the people. Andrews spent his last hours going cabin to cabin, knocking on doors, telling people to put on life jackets and get to a boat if there was room. There's this one detail that gets me every time. A steward later said he saw Andrews standing alone in the first-class smoking room, just standing there, staring at a painting on the wall. The painting was of Plymouth Harbor, a stop the Titanic was supposed to make on the way back to England, like he was looking at a place he'd never see again, like he'd already accepted it. Other survivors said they saw him helping people evacuate right up until the very end, throwing deck chairs into the water for people to float on, pushing people toward the lifeboats. His body was never found. He was 39 years old. Number 3. Isidor and Ida Straus. Now this is the story that still makes people emotional, even 110 years later, because this isn't about money, this isn't about status, this is about love. Isidor Straus was born in Germany in a town called Otterberg. His family moved to the United States after the Civil War, and he eventually ended up in New York. That's where he met a woman named Ida. They got married in 1871, and by every account they were inseparable. Everyone who knew them said the same thing. They were never apart, and here's the thing. They built a life together, a huge life. Isidor and his brother Nathan took over Macy's department store in 1896. Within a few months, they owned the whole thing outright. Isidor became one of the wealthiest men in the country. He even served as a US congressman for a while. But none of that mattered on the night of April 14th. They were on the Titanic returning from a trip to Germany. Isidor had been there on business. They were in first class, and they were offered seats on a lifeboat. Isidor refused. He said he wouldn't leave while women and children were still on deck. Even though he was 67 years old and easily could have justified taking a seat, he refused. And then Ida did something that still gets people today. She refused to leave without him. The crew actually tried to force her into the boat. They said, "Mrs. Straus, you have to go, he'll be fine." But she wouldn't budge. She told the crew, and this is quoted in multiple survivor accounts, "We have been living together for many years. Where you go, I go. Just let that sink in." She had a seat, she was safe, she could have lived, and she said no. They put their maid, Ellen Bird, in the lifeboat instead. She survived. Isidor and Ida were last seen standing arm in arm on the deck, watching the water rise. Isidor's body was recovered later and buried at Woodlawn Cemetery, one of the largest cemeteries in New York. Ida's body was never found. Think about that for a second. A woman who had everything, money, status, a seat on a lifeboat, chose death because she couldn't imagine living without her husband. That's not a movie, that's real. If any of these stories are hitting you, and I know they are, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. It honestly helps more people find these videos. And if you're into history stuff like this, go ahead and subscribe. We dig up a new one every week. Alright, back to it, because it only gets heavier from here. Number 4, William Thomas Stead. Now this one is weird, like genuinely strange. If you're into the supernatural or premonitions, this is the story for you. William Thomas Stead was a British journalist, and not just any journalist. He basically invented investigative journalism as we know it. He was famous in his time for exposing child prostitution in London. His articles actually changed laws. He was one of the most influential journalists of the Victorian era. But here's where it gets strange. In 1886, 26 years before the Titanic, Stead wrote a fictional story. It was called How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic by a Survivor. And in that story, a passenger liner sinks in the Atlantic. There aren't enough lifeboats. Only 200 people survive out of 700 on board. Fast forward to 1912. Stead is 62 years old. He's traveling to America for a peace conference. He's invited by President Taft himself, and he boards the Titanic. According to witnesses, once the ship started sinking, Stead helped women and children into lifeboats. He didn't try to save himself. And then, this is the detail that gives people chills. He went back to the first-class smoking room, sat down in a chair, and started reading a book. He just sat there. His body was never found. Now, Stead was into spiritualism. He believed in communicating with the dead. So over the years, a lot of people have pointed to his 1886 story as some kind of premonition, like he somehow saw his own death coming, decades before it happened. Was it a coincidence? Was it something else? I don't know. But it's one of the strangest details in the whole Titanic story. Number 5, Joseph Laroche. Now this story is different from the others, because the others were rich, they were famous, they were part of the elite. Joseph Laroche was not. Joseph Laroche was born in Haiti. He was a well-educated engineer who had moved to France at the age of 15 to study. He'd trained in the best schools, but after he graduated, he couldn't find work that paid what he was worth because of racial discrimination. He was a black man in France in the early 1900s. The jobs that were available to him were far below his qualifications, so he worked odd jobs here and there but never found a career. He married a French woman named Juliette, and they had 2 daughters. When Juliette got pregnant with their 3rd child, the 2 of them decided to leave France behind. They were going to move back to Haiti, to start over, to escape the discrimination, to build a better life for their family. They booked passage on the Titanic, 2nd class. Joseph Laroche is believed to have been the only black passenger on the ship. Think about that, the only one. When the ship started sinking, he managed to get his pregnant wife and his 2 young daughters onto a lifeboat, and then he stepped back. He didn't get on himself. His body was never found. His widow, Juliette, went back to France with the children. She later gave birth to a son, a boy who would never know his father, and she named him after the man she'd lost, Joseph Laroche Jr. So a Haitian man who couldn't get a fair job in France because of the color of his skin died on the Titanic, but his family lived. Number 6. Benjamin Guggenheim. Now this is the story of a man who died with style, literally. The Guggenheims were a mining family. They'd made their fortune in silver, copper, and gold. Benjamin Guggenheim was 46 years old, and he was one of the richest men on that ship. But unlike some of the others, Benjamin was a bit of a playboy. He was traveling on the Titanic with his mistress, a French singer named Leontine Barr. He also brought along his personal staff, a valet, a driver, and a maid. On the night of the sinking, Guggenheim was actually optimistic at first. After the collision, he put his maid on a lifeboat and told her, "This is just a repair. Tomorrow the Titanic will be on her way again." He really believed that. But then things got real. The ship was clearly going down. There was no repair, and here's where the story gets legendary. Guggenheim realized he wasn't getting off that ship, so he did something that sounds like it's from a movie, but it actually happened. He went back to his cabin and he changed his clothes. He put on his finest evening wear, a top hat, a tailcoat, a rose in his lapel. He wanted to go down looking like a gentleman, and then he said, and this is quoted by survivors, "We've dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." He also left a note for his wife which read, "If anything should happen to me, tell my wife I did my best in doing my duty." Benjamin Guggenheim's body was never identified, neither was his valet's. He was 46 years old. Number 7. George Dennick Wick. This is the last story, and it's one of the quietest, but somehow one of the saddest. George Dennick Wick was the founding president of the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company. It was a massive steel manufacturer in Ohio. The company doesn't exist anymore. It was eventually bought out, but at the time Wick was a giant in the industry. He was 58 years old, and he'd traveled to Europe to recover from an illness. He was heading back to the States to be with his family. His wife and daughter were on the ship with him. When the lifeboats were being loaded, Wick was separated from his family. His wife and daughter were placed in a boat, and he was told to wait. And here's the detail that haunts me. The last time anyone saw him alive, he was standing on the deck of the sinking ship, waving to his wife and daughter as they were lowered into the water, just waving, saying goodbye. His body was never found. His wife and daughter survived. I think about that sometimes. A man who'd spent his whole life building something, a steel company, a fortune, a family, and in the end all he could do was wave goodbye. So that's 7. Out of more than 1,500 people who never made it home that night, some of them had fortunes bigger than most of us will ever see in our lifetimes. Some of them had almost nothing. But in the end, the ocean didn't care who you were. It just came down to who got a seat and who gave theirs up. And here's something I want you to think about. Every single person on that ship had a life. They had families, they had plans, they had dreams. Some of them were going to America to start a new chapter. Some of them were going home. Some of them were just on vacation. But in the end, they all shared the same cold water, the same dark sky, the same terrifying last moment. Their names are in history books, but they weren't just names, they were people. And stories like these, they remind us that the past isn't just dates and numbers, it's real human beings who loved and lost and made choices that still echo 100 years later. If you were on that deck, honestly, would you have taken the seat or given it up? Comment, take, or give below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, if you want to dig into history that actually happened, not just Hollywood versions, hit subscribe. We dig up a new one every week.